And we're live. Okay, there are already 150 people watching. No, I'm kidding. Welcome everyone, and hello for a new episode of our podcast exploring things that get us excited in technology in general and in blockchain in particular. Today I'm joined by Lancelot and Sylve from briq. Hi.
Hey folks.
Hi everyone.
First question, Lancelot, Sylve, how do people pronounce your name in English? And do they obsess a lot asking you, oh, am I saying it right?
So we actually have a funny story about it. It was during the DevConnect hackathon. It was about 2 a.m. where we were just starting to lose our mind. And I just randomly said, people usually think that Sylve and Lancelot are not our real names, but are pseudonyms. And then the rest of the team just froze and was like, oh, so these are your actual names. So the answer to how people pronounce our names is badly. In English it's Sylve for me.
Yeah, for me, I don't really mind the English pronunciation Lancelot or the French Lancelot.
Cool.
Yeah. People
nice.
do think it's a pseudonym all the time.
Yeah, it sounds very specific, I guess, to foreign speakers. Let's start. Let's kick off the podcast by hearing your background stories. Where do you guys come from? What did you like? What did you study? What did you work on before launching briq?
Can you go first for that one? So I'm Sylve, soon to be 28, and now so I've studied business in French. That's actually how I met Lancelot. We met during our studies. I've always been super interested in technology in general, and more like how we can give people tools to achieve new things. So I got interested in blockchain fairly early on in 2016, 17, but didn't think much of it. Then I deep dive more into it in 17, 18 through NFTs, wrote my master's thesis on it. And then I worked at Ledger for about 3-4 years as a product manager. And then we co-founded briq together with Lancelot in 2021.
How did you hear about it in 2016?
It was a friend of mine who's now one of our investors called Pierre Entremont, who is actually the first person to have tweeted the word NFT. He tweeted in 16, 17, we need a standard for non-fungible tokens. So we've got the guy who invented a non-fungible token as one of our lead investors. So I was talking with him and I said, yeah, blockchain is okay, this is really cool, but look at this new stuff that is coming around that is called NFTs. And that actually did not disappoint.
Very nice. And what about you, Lancelot? What's your background story? So you guys met at school?
Yeah, we met a little over 10 years ago, just after high school. I'm 1 year older than Sylve, and so he basically followed me during my studies.
Were you guys in a club together or something? I know it's very common in these kind of schools.
We were in the Tumblr association that posted memes about the school, but that's about it. It's not going to surprise people that follow our Twitter account, I guess.
That's where your meme passion comes from, back in the days at university.
Yeah. I mean, it come from earlier, but that's how it manifested. For me, blockchain is much more recent. I mean, I've heard of it since basically forever because I spent way too much time on Reddit. But it was something that I never got into until basically last year. My initial job was in data analytics and data science, and at a company called Job Teaser in France. And last year I had quit that job. I was unemployed. Sylve contacted me in June about saying, hey, I got this plan. We can make a blockchain company. We've got some funding. Let's go. And so I had nothing better to do, essentially. And I went, okay, sure, yeah, let's make a company together. And that's how I discovered blockchain, because then I had to I went, okay, well, I need to kind of know what's going on.
And how is it for you? Like, is it still just a technology, or did it like? Would you tomorrow just go back to data without losing your sleep at night?
I would go back to data without losing sleep, but I have a weird relationship with blockchain, I think, for somebody who's building on StarkNet. I actually I contribute to an open source video game project called 080. And so for me, when people talk about decentralization, privacy, stuff like that, that does mean something to me as part of my open source experience. But the way it manifests on blockchain is usually very different. And I think my summary of blockchain as a technology as a whole is that the technology is kind of cool, but I really wish people made more efforts to avoid the financial people. Like, if Bitcoin never went above $10, the ecosystem would be a much better place. End of story.
It would be much slower. It would be much slower also.
It would be much slower as well. But I mean, the open source project I just mentioned is 20 years old, and it's going to live forever because it's open source. The timelines are, that's my opinion, I think the ecosystem would be better if it was less financialized, because the financialization has brought a lot of economic bubbles and does a lot of scams and everything. I mean, we know about.
I see what you mean. So you see financialization as basically it's a distraction. It's a distraction for builders. It's a risk for users. And so that's the one part you don't like about blockchain.
Well, that's the big thing that I don't like about blockchain. I do also think that the move to proof of stake is necessary, because proof of work was... I find proof of work incredibly fascinating from a technological standpoint. But yeah, if you want a blockchain that actually works, it's not gonna do it. But
wait, you mean proof of work? You don't think it works in the long term?
I think it works, but I think the planet cannot sustain it for in 5 years. It's over basically. The energy consumption just makes no sense. It's fascinating.
I hear your point. So you think it's not sustainable long term because of energy issues?
Yeah, essentially. It is wasteful by design, which is it's cool, but it's not as cool as something less wasteful potentially. Though I do feel like it's more elegant than proof of stake in a mathematical way. Anyways.
The externalities are too much for you.
Yeah, basically. The one thing I've ended up maybe surprisingly liking about blockchain is actually NFTs, which is how this ties into briq and why I'm not too weirded out about what I'm doing daily. Because a lot of things in blockchain are the same thing as stuff that already exists in the real world, but decentralized or slightly different. And I think that's not, it's not bad, but it's not super interesting. Whereas NFTs are something new. And the new thing is the ability to have original items in a digital-based world. So what I mean is that, the example I give usually is that if you're a painter and you paint some work, whatever, a flower, you have an object you're painting that is the original and that you can sell, and it has value because it's the original. And this is something that you had no digital equivalent for, because the original digital PNG of an image, that's not a thing, because there was no way to identify this original. And NFTs give that, are the tool to be able to identify the original, and thus the original can have value, and thus you can have an original file of a digital painting or a digital work of music or a digital whatever. And I think that's actually really innovative, and still nobody has actually understood NFTs that way. It seems like when you look at the ecosystem as a whole. But that's where I'm saying nobody, it's not quite true, but most people don't see them that way. And I think that's what's really, really cool about that technology in particular.
I see your point. I've heard people from the traditional art world also make the counter argument that, today what gives value to an original painting is not the actual frame or the actual paint, it's the certificate of ownership. Because today, people who counterfeit paintings are so good at painting it that they could copy any frame, and even the person who painted it wouldn't be able to make the difference. So, like, the authenticity and provenance in the art world is a big topic. We don't hear that much about it because there's a layer of people who take care of it for us, but it's a big theme for them. Like, and this is not a new question, by the way. You've heard this. I don't know if it's a metaphor or how you would call it, but imagine you have a boat, and every day you take out a plank of the boat, you replace it, and at the end you have two boats. Which one is the original? And it's like this question, and have been around forever. So basically, what we call the original is just a subjective decision, in a way. And whether it's sanctified by a piece of paper or a digital certificate, well, what matters is how you can manipulate it.
And that's actually why there's a whole category of art pieces that have been, I would say, considered minor, in the sense that how they manifest themselves, like physically, isn't really suitable to the current IP management or art certification system. And so, like, one thing I remember, it was like I was in a photography exposition, and there was a digital canvas that was like back in 2016-17. It was a digital canvas of a GIF. It was just a video just looping over and over and over of people like going up Hill Tower, then jumping in the water and just doing it over and over, a bit like an Escher style of it. And it got me thinking, like, how do you sell this? How do you manage that? Because you can sell a painting, that's easy. You can assert provenance. But for this, the only way that you could verify that it's an original, it's either through DRM, and that never actually really worked, or IP management. So that means that every time you're selling it, you need to go to a lawyer and have it verified, and that just costs a lot of money. Therefore, most of this art has been priced out or normalized out of the current system. So that's why NFTs lend themselves to be very, very useful to stuff that wasn't easy to monetize before, such as JPEGs, GIFs, or digital art in themselves. It was very rare before NFTs that you'd sell a JPEG.
I fully agree with that. I think that's one of the strengths of these use cases of blockchain that do find product market fit, and DeFi is another example, is that they get product market fit because they serve communities that are underserved by the traditional world. Very cool. So what was the first NFT you guys interacted with, and how was that interaction like? Which chain was it? What was the first NFT you guys ever used?
When you say use, like bought or just looked at very closely and said, wow, what's going on there?
I'm curious about both, actually.
So when I really researched NFTs like a lot, it was like 17, 18.
So that's what got you into blockchain, right? So that's NFTs. What was the point where you just went like, oh, wait, this is interesting?
The moment that really like got me hooked up definitely was I understood Bitcoin, and I was like, okay, that's really cool. Like now you have like natively digital money, and that's super cool. Like you can make transfers, and that's not stoppable. That's unstoppable. So that's really cool. But I only understood that part of it. Then I delved more into Ethereum. That was back when I was in an internship at a VC firm, and like 10% of my time was just like research stuff and write stuff about it. So I decided to nerd snipe blockchains. Like, okay, how does that work? What's proof of work? How does that work? What's a smart contract? And the moment I understood what a smart contract actually is, which is just like a commitment machine, it's like you write a contract, but you don't have to have it enforced by a lawyer. You can write a piece of code that doesn't run on one particular computer. It can be run by anyone. You start having sort of these weird autonomous programs, and that just opens up a whole range of possibilities. Like we talked about the shifts before. rather than go to a lawyer or notary to ascertain that I'm transferring an object from myself to Lancelot, I can just do this on chain. And so that all of a sudden that just clicked for me to realize that you have this whole range of activities that just cannot happen and that are now being priced back in for the common for everyone. There's a book called The Mystery of Capital from a South American economist called De Soto. And so he has this very, very clever take on why liberalization has never worked in developing countries, because usually most of the assets that people own cannot don't match with the system that is being imposed. So he says when you're in a favela, for instance, you have no certificates of property. So you can't use your property as a collateral to get a loan or something else. So you're not necessarily priced out, but the system, the legal framework doesn't allow you to participate in it, and it's too expensive for you to do it. So I was thinking, okay, that's actually a way for people to create commitments, to create norms, to create rules at a marginal cost. And that's something that Antonopoulos says really well when he says that Bitcoin is driving the price of the marginal transaction to zero, the same way that internet brought the cost of the marginal information to zero, like it just costs nothing to create more information. And I think we're going to see the price of commitments, the price of contracting just go to zero. It's going to be much, much easier to create rules and have people abide by them rather than have like a central authority manage everything.
That's really interesting. And what about you, Lancelot?
I just want to jump in on what Sylve said, because I think there is one caveat to that, and I think Sylve would agree, which is so long as the things you're acting on are also on the blockchain.
Exactly.
And this is one of the big things that most people miss about smart contracts, is that, blockchain is actually legitimately when people say metaverse, they don't know what they mean. What they actually mean is that the objects that exist on the blockchain and that are being ruled by the smart contracts have an existence that's basically as real as the physical universe. Because in a properly decentralized blockchain with the right incentives, things are not going to disappear in 100 years. So, it might just as well be real. And in that context, I definitely agree with what Sylve is saying. But if you try to tie it down to the real world, you run into the problem that you don't have police unless you have some people that are actually enforcing the rules of blockchain in the real world, which sounds like a weird futuristic job that you might want to make a film out of.
Blockchain police.
I don't think that's that stupid. I think that right now, if you were to say to a notary, hey, I'm buying a house and the certificate of ownership is on the blockchain, they'll say, yeah, sure. Because when you look at it, why is it more stupid to say that you own your house because of a piece of paper that is in one office someplace that some guys signed a while ago, rather than something somebody signed digitally a shorter while ago? Just what matters is that people agree that yes, this is the truth. The reality is that to exchange cars, houses, or all of this stuff, we had to come up with a way that we all feel comfortable with, saying, okay, this is how these things work. And changing that is very difficult. And that's why NFTs and this kind of stuff emerge on underserved community. But just like with the internet, these things will grow, tooling will get better, and we'll get to a point where these systems are so obviously better than what works in the traditional world that the traditional world will just go oh yeah, let's use that instead. That kind of like what happens with cellular telephony. For a while, the cellular networks and the phone network were very apart from the internet, and they were looking down upon the internet. And nowadays, almost all of your calls are VoIP.
Yeah, I think, definitely agree with that. But, it does mean that governments will need to recognize the legitimacy of some blockchain and start enforcing what's happening there, which is not a conversation people in the crypto space want to have, I think. I'm just seeing too many people that, the idea that police is going to enforce the state of a smart contract is fucking weird right now. Sorry,
I mean,
I don't know if I'm able to swear on this podcast.
We'll figure it out. But don't you think that if tomorrow I hack a smart contract, steal millions of dollars, and put my name on the hack, don't you think police is going to come knock on my door?
I think they should. I'm not sure they would right now, but I definitely think they should. But I think that's something that, there is this whole vibe of privacy, decentralization. It means we don't need a central authority. But that does, if you want to go into that's true for what's happening on chain. But if you want to tie it down to the physical world, you still have the problem of violence and police and governments and stuff like that. You're not fixing that with blockchain. It's just, anyways, that's kind of a philosophical.
No, but I agree with that. I think that I think blockchain solves a lot of stuff and enables a lot of new behaviors, but who has the bigger stick still is a very physical issue, and it doesn't matter what's written on the blockchain.
Yeah. Anyways, I'm going to answer your question now. I don't actually do that. I think the first thing I heard about NFTs were probably the profile pictures, Bored Apes, CryptoPunk, something like that. Probably didn't really understand what was going on then. The first thing that I truly thought about was over last summer, and I think the two projects that I thought were most interesting right away were the Loot project and the Sora football cards project. I think Loot was a real, it was very important in that it opened your mind up to, NFTs aren't just JPEGs. I think it was a really original, it's not necessarily an original idea, but a really good execution on a really good concept that, since NFTs are just capturing an idea of something, which is usually the idea of owning the original of a specific digital art. But not always. You could just own the concept of a sword or something like that. And that was what the Luge project really made people see, I think, in the beginning. It's not, because the whole NFT thing that way as a whole isn't entirely recognized, it's not that obvious, but I think it will become obvious in the long run that, Loot was one of the more innovative projects in that space. And for us, for briq, and I think we'll maybe talk about this a bit later, it has been super important that our concept is kind of Loot, but as 3D voxels in a way. Anyways, so that was
but go on, please.
Yeah, Loot on one side, and Sora on the other side, I think is very interesting because if you look at we had a presentation at an NFT day in Paris last summer, some kind of conference, I don't remember the exact name, and someone from Sora talked about them, and they were not a blockchain company. It was kind of weird because we were talking about generative art and stuff like that, and suddenly this guy comes in, tells you about trying to sign people from the Belgian Football League, and doesn't even really talk about NFTs. And the funny thing was that I don't understand how the guys at Sora managed to think of this in 2019, but they've understood everything that makes NFTs click. The Sora cards are not, the important part is not, and whatever the image. It's the fact that you understand the value of a player to the football world at a given point in time. You can actually buy a rare card of a young player today, and if that guy becomes the next Leo Messi, it means you've understood, you've seen it, and now your card is worth a lot more money. And that's kind of the insane potential that NFTs can have, because they can put a price point on an idea, and in a very, very easy way. And here's where I join Sylve, that it's pretty hard to do in the real world, but in NFTs, you just deploy a smart contract and you're kind of done. There's a lot of other steps to it. They have licensing issues, a lot of fun stuff, but always, the gambling gambling. Anyway, it's very complicated in practice, but in theory, it's super powerful and super easy to use NFTs to capture
concepts.
What I'm going to call the cultural value of concepts, things like that, and I mean, obviously including art, but not necessarily just including art.
Culture is much bigger than just art.
Yeah,
there's a lot.
And I'm still. I think those are the two projects that I had an early interest in, and I still think these are some of the only. I like to say only worthwhile products in the NFT space, because I feel like there are a lot of things that are essential. I mean, they're not scams technically, because everyone knows what they're buying, but they're inflated in price. Probably you don't get $100 worth of enjoyment out of a profile picture.
Wait, you don't?
It's unlikely, I think. Some people maybe do. Anyways.
And so how did Loot and Sorare influence you building briq? Like, first, where did the idea for briq come? And maybe first, like, what is briq?
So TLDR on what briq is. It's an NFT building and composability protocol that revolves around little particles called briq. So the simplest definition I could give is that it's somewhat like Lego, but on chain. So you have these little blocks, and each of them is called a briq. All these blocks are stored on chain. They're all different tokens, and they have the fun ability to be able to be assembled into a single NFT. So let's say you have like 10 briqs, you build a house out of it, and that house is now an NFT. It's been assembled into an NFT. If you get bored with your house, you can disassemble it, get the briqs back, and you can build something new. So it's basically NFT, not matter, but for NFTs.
Very nice. So how did you get the idea of, hey, let's do Legos on chain?
I think so. We started out like in July, August, like jotting around different ideas. We looked a lot at gaming. We looked at IP management and remixing. And at some point, I think it was not long after Loot emerged, and I think it was definitely like in the first Matrix movie when like the bald kid tells Neo like the trick is that there's no spoon. I think it was the same thing for us. Like there's no JPEG. Like the NFT is not the JPEG. There's something else behind it. So that's the story we usually tell. It's like we went up the mountain, smoked something, and when we came back down, we had the mystical revelation that the closest thing that you could compare NFTs to is a physical item, which is both extremely profound and extremely dumb. But they have properties that are actually very different from normal digital items. For instance, like in French law, you have 3 attributes for property. Usus, meaning that you can use your property any way you want. So if I have this pen, I can just write with it. I can stick it in my nose if I want. You have fructus, meaning that I can sell it. I can lend it to Lancelot. I can create a company and sell shares for the ownership of this pen. And then you have abusus, meaning that you can modify it. Like I can take this apart. I can destroy it. I can lose it. And when you go about these 3 characteristics and apply them to NFTs, you realize that they have it all. You can use an NFT any way you want because an NFT exists outside of a given context, which is not the case like for a flame sword. Like a flame sword in World of Warcraft has just like one usage. You can't take it out of that one specific context. Fructus, an NFT, you can obviously sell it, lend it out. You have all different kind of Lego protocols that you can use in order to benefit financially from an NFT. That's not something that you can do, at least legally, with a normal digital item like in a video game. And finally, abusus, the very, very weird thing about NFTs is that you hear people say, someone stole my NFT. And when you like pause for a second and you really think about what that means, like 10 years ago, no one was thinking about someone stole my JPEG. There's something, and that was like definitely the moment for Lancelot and myself where we realized like something was going on. It was like, why? What makes it so that people think I own this JPEG in a very like primal sense? Like why do people have this sense of ownership, this sense that they actually own this thing? Like something triggers in the reptilian brain and makes them go, okay, I own this thing, something very, very deep. And we realize that it's because they're objects. So something triggers in your behavior that makes you go, I own this thing, because they have all the characteristics of a physical item. So that was like, wow, that's super fun. And when you start looking at NFTs through this lens, it makes a lot more sense. Why are people buying paintings or art as NFTs? Because people buy art. That's the same reason. It's just the medium has changed. It's just digital first and foremost. Why do people buy Axes? Just the same way people buy Pokemon cards. Why do people buy Sylve cards? The same way people buy baseball cards. So it all started to click once we had this physicality lens. And so the question we asked ourselves at that point was, okay, there's this dream about NFTs that they have to be very interoperable, meaning that if you have one NFT and another one, you can have them like click together, and you can bring them over to one metaverse, and they can easily weave in and out of different contexts. But that has actually yet to happen. So we sat down and we said, okay, is there a physical object, a physical item that has these properties of being easy to build and compose with? And as it turns out, I have like a giant Lego spaceship right behind me. So that was a bit of an aha moment, like, okay, has anyone been dumb enough to actually try and rebuild Lego, but on chain? And that's how briq came to be.
And why would it be dumb to build Legos on chain when you're doing it? Why would it be a dumb idea?
No, it's more like it's what I call an illegal ID. It's I like to say that before CryptoKitties basically had Ethereum come to a halt in 2018, everyone had dreams about the blockchain. It's like, we're going to put Uber on the blockchain. I'm going to tokenize my grandmother. We're going to run the entire world on the blockchain. And then a tiny collectible game comes around and just everything comes to a full stop. And that's honestly one of the moments, I think, where people stopped dreaming and started optimizing gas. And it's telling that one of the honestly, the first real on-chain application that we had for blockchain, when I say like smart contract wise, is DeFi, because you're able to foot a $150 transaction fee when you're transacting hundreds of thousands of dollars. That's palatable. But you're not able to do that. You will never pay $150 to equip a hat in a game. That's just, you have a whole range of activity that is priced out of happening on chain. So briq is actually one of these illegal IDs, because it adds a lot more logic to creating NFTs. It adds a lot more overhead in terms of computation. So that's not something that can happen on an L1. And that's something that we realized very early on with Lancelot. And that's actually the reason we're building briq on StarkNet.
So how did you hear about StarkNet, and how did you get to think like, oh yeah, maybe this is a good fit?
I knew about StarkNet back from my Ledger days. So shout out to the rest of the Ledger team. We looked at the different L2 options. We looked at Polygon, Optimism, and we thought, okay, if this thing needs to fly, we need the leanest, meanest, baddest kind of optimization we can get. And ZK rollups sounded like the right fit. And when we built the first MVP for briq, it was in late November. The StarkNet testnet had just been released, so we just decided to build the MVP for briq during a hackathon on the testnet. So it was
late November 2021, right?
Yeah, exactly, last year. And so it was both like I knew the team, I knew the technology, I very much believed in it. And the more time we spent on StarkNet, like the more the community was growing, the more the tooling was growing. And so what was like an enlightened choice in the beginning, very quickly became like the right choice, very early on.
November 2021 was a rough place for Cairo developers. I mean, don't get me wrong, the developer experience for Cairo dev is still kind of like is difficult, and more difficult than in other ecosystems for sure. Back in November, it was arguably much harder. I'm curious, what changed in these 6 months? What made you feel like, oh, this is getting better? And do you still have a souvenir of things, and you think like, oh, how did we actually do that? It was so painful.
Yeah, I think the biggest one is the library support. When we started in November, I think during the hackathon, the first library for interacting with the gateway was released for JavaScript. I might have my timing off. But when we started, there was no way to interact from front end or back end with StarkNet except by directly calling the gateway, which was not very, very practical. Nowadays, there are a lot of SDKs for a lot of languages, abstracting most of it away. When we started, there were no events on StarkNet. It was just it was barely working, but it was working. And the project, the advantage that we had is that we were not trying to do anything too fancy. The NFT standards, ERC 721 is pretty simple. We do have like a few briq specific things that are kind of weird, but it's not too difficult in terms of logic to write, which helped a lot in the beginning.
Cool. And how did you get into Cairo, Lancelot? Because I think you're the one writing Cairo.
Yeah, my way of starting Cairo is probably one that people don't do anymore. I took the tutorial on the internet, which at the time started with the actual Cairo tutorial, which made you write a program and then run it and then run the proof and had some things about hints. And so that was a very weird experience. I didn't find it too horrible because I have a lot of C++ experience from working on the video game project. And so I'm like pretty familiar with pointers and memory manipulation and things like that. And once I understood the memory model of Cairo, I understood mostly what was happening, and it was okay. But writing Cairo for StarkNet is definitely much easier than writing Cairo for, running your own Cairo programs and verifying them. Because the hints thing is still kind of weird to wrap your head around.
It is. I agree with you. I think it's easier to write things for StarkNet with Cairo because the programming model is closer to what you have in existing platforms such as Solidity. Otherwise, just running a provable program and getting a proof for it is, it makes more sense after a while, but in the beginning, it's like, okay, what exactly am I doing? Am I proving something? What's the finality of it? What do I need to prove? Who's going to verify it? It can be very confusing. I think there's this fun stuff with Cairo that it's not a smart contract programming language. You can do a lot of stuff with it. And it kind of feels like, okay, let's narrow down what we can do with smart contract languages. Otherwise, it's just going to be too much and too complicated. But you already can do a decent amount of stuff with smart contracts on Cairo. Sylve, you mentioned the community. I'm curious, when you began working in blockchain in general, and for StarkNet in particular, my guess is that you first got into the community through your screen, right? Online, on Telegram, in Twitter. How do you weave relationships? Because you guys are very into the ecosystem and you know a lot of people inside of it. How do you weave relationships with people through a screen? And what happens when you meet them in real life?
We actually had like funny stories about that. I think the first person we interacted from that was in part of the StarkNet ecosystem, but not from Starkware, was our Lord and Savior Guilty Gyoza, who was actually the first. So Guilty Gyoza is the co-founder of Topology, which is building physics on-chain and game engines on StarkNet. And he was actually the first person to comment on the first tweet we made about briq. It's like, oh wait, we built this NFT building protocol on StarkNet. And first tweet, I think it was like 30 seconds after we posted, was Gyoza commenting, I want to build a physics engine for this. So I think that was the moment that two things went through my head. Like one, like, what the fuck, like a physics engine on chain? And second, who are you? So we looked at his repo and we realized, like, okay, this madman has actually built a GLTF renderer, a machine learning algorithm, and he's actually built a physics engine running on StarkNet. So that was our first foray into the StarkNet craziness, and I think we couldn't have had a better guy than Gyoza.
So did you follow up with him? Like, did you answer? Did you guys get on a call? How did it happen? Was it written, video?
I reached out to everyone who reacted to the initial post that we had. So it's a couple of people from Realms at the time that was just like beginning to coalesce into moving from optimism to StarkNet, Gyoza. It was just like very grassroots in the beginning. It's more like, okay, who's building what? You just see like a new lead pop up every week. Then it's
hey, I have a weird error. Can you help me out?
Yeah, it was mostly. I mean, that was probably more Lancelot. On my end, it was more like, what the fuck is this guy doing with Cairo? And then I think end of December, beginning Jan, that was the moment we actually deployed a briq on mainnet. That's the moment everyone started to have like forums, such as like Telegram chats. Matchbox was beginning to structure itself, I think. So that's when people really started to congregate around shared topics. And whenever you had someone put something on, it's usually how people get into the community, so that they write like a piece of code about in Cairo, and very quickly either you, Luca, or Louis just stumble upon them, add them to the Telegram chat, and that's how everyone gets to know them.
And how do you make the connection with real life? Do you guys ever meet some of these people in real life, and how did it happen? How was it?
The first time we actually met some other people that were like building on StarkNet, it was like during a few meetups in Paris. But the one moment, I think the first time the community actually got together was during Dev Connect in Amsterdam. I think it was in April, because it was the first time that we had a StarkNet hackathon happen IRL. So that was the first moment most of the StarkNet community was actually in a single place, in a single moment. So we actually got to meet a lot of the Realms team, Lord of a Few, Guilty Gyoza. That's the moment we met everyone, and I think that was a very important moment for the community. So very excited also for future events such as EthCC happening during EthCC in Paris in July.
Yeah, I don't know when we're going to air this podcast, but you're right. We are about a month away from EthCC, and we're going to have a bunch of events. I'm really curious. The fun thing about these events also is that StarkAthon, the hackathon in Amsterdam, was very much organized by Starkware. Right now, there are 3 days of events planned for the end of EthCC, and we're not involved in this. I mean, we're in touch with the organizers. We help where we can, but it's not us organizing. And I think it's really beautiful to see the community grow its own legs. You guys were part of various communities online, right? How would you say how would you say StarkNet can get better at growing its community?
I think it's growing already pretty well. It's more like community building, I guess, is a very viral thing in the sense that it starts off fairly slow and then everything picks up if each individual person adds 2 more people to the ecosystem and just like spirals out very, very quickly. And I think we're on this kind of trend right now. So I would honestly say that just keep up the good work. I think your team, Henri, and the ecosystem team is doing like a tremendous job banding people together, reaching out to them, and putting them in touch with each other. So yeah, more of the same thing, I would say. We're using
more meetups and hackathons.
Yeah,
I think from my end, I'm going to quote myself at the beginning of this podcast. You guys don't have a token, which is one of the famous jokes in the ecosystem, because everybody is asking when token. There's no token. I mean, yet. But one of the things that this means is that there are no people trying to pump their bags or, do this kind of thing. And so, as I said earlier, well, the community is growing because people believe in the technology, like what they see, and it's growing organically out of the potential quality of of the project instead of as a financial bubble, which is super different from a lot of other blockchain projects. And sure, it's slower. I mean, I feel like StarkNet would potentially easily be one of the top coins if you guys had launched with a token 2 years ago or something. But the technology and the ecosystem wouldn't be the same as it is today, and it wouldn't be nearly as nice. And I think most people will agree that the signal to noise ratio on StarkNet in the StarkNet ecosystem is super high. And I think that's in large part because there has not been this financial incentive to be here. If you want, to pump and to profit from that, you can't be here because there's no token to do that with. So those people just aren't in that ecosystem. And yeah, it's probably slower for the growth, but I think it's much saner, much better growth overall. So you guys have done the effort of keeping the extreme financialization at bay in that respect, which I think is a good thing.
Very cool.
I think that Cairo acts as the language in itself acts as a double filter in the sense that I agree with you, Lancelot, it deters scammer, first of all, because it's still an alpha, but it's also much more difficult to deploy anything because you don't have a lot of things to copy paste because there's no code yet, and not a lot of projects yet. And the second is it attracts, I think it made a great job of attracting very nerdy and innovation driven people. I think it was Luis Gutmann who said Caro is like eating glass. It's stupid, but it looks cool. So other people want to do it. So I think going the hard way might have been actually the very, very sensible decision in that sense to attract this type of people.
In it for the tech.
Definitely in it for the tech.
For sure. What are stuff you guys are excited to see emerge on StarkNet? What are projects you think oh wow, this is fascinating?
I think the one project that I think is absolutely fascinating on StarkNet is Fossil. Moment
storage proof, right?
Yeah, storage proofs. I first heard about it because I reached out to Terence from Dope Wars. So Dope Wars is a game running on StarkNet, and they have. I read the documentation and I realized that the NFTs were actually sitting on Optimism. So I was wondering, okay, you've got the assets on Optimism, but the game is on StarkNet. So just how does this whole thing work? Are you going to bridge the assets? And Terence sent me the link to the Fossil repo, which I think it was back in January, was absolute garbage. Documentation was non-existent. But I understood that it was a way to prove facts about the chain that you're on, but also on other chains. So that would allow you to prove something like, is it true that address UX something owns this punk at this block? And you can prove this fact if this is on Optimism, on Ethereum, and have the fact proven on StarkNet. So I think that's extremely, extremely powerful to allow people to, and this is something that's going to be used by, I know that Astrally, formerly known as ZKPad, is going to use it. I know that Snapshot is going to use it. And I think that's very, very powerful to allow people to benefit from the added computational power of StarkNet while keeping their assets where they sit.
Interesting.
Yeah, I think one of the cool usages of Fossil also is what I'm going to call delayed storage. You can send a transaction on StarkNet with some call data, but you can't read it. But Fossil enables you to write it on-chain in a way that can be read on-chain at a later point, because you can go back and prove that what was initially sent was indeed what you're writing right now. So you can store something for much cheaper than you could otherwise.
That's messed up. The way people would go to avoid storage. That's brilliant. I never had that idea. That's super interesting.
Yeah, I thought about it because we were considering doing that for the briq shape things. I don't know if people are actually going to use it, but this potential delayed storage is, I think, one of the real cool usage of that tech.
You should call it zombie storage. That's really interesting.
Funny. This is really funny.
I mean, it assumes that people don't lose blocks in the meantime, but that's...
And that's another question. I mean, like, there are so many open fields, but like, how do you maintain a chain such as StarkNet? Do you need to keep blocks? Do you need to keep transactions? My hot take is that I think block content and transactions are not going to matter that much. What will matter probably is going to be events. But then you're just circling back to the same thing. If you have a huge database of events, how do you maintain it? And it will require a big, like, we'll need innovative solution to maintain these events.
Yeah, one of the things we discussed with Sylve at some point was the idea that I find it weird that in blockchain you don't have a concept of cold storage and hot storage. Because on Ethereum, you just like all the data is equally expensive to access.
Interesting.
And
I mean, you mean in your smart contract? There's this in the sense that you can store data in your smart contract that is expensive, and everything you don't need.
What I mean is that the write and the read and the write, the load. I don't remember the name of the EVM opcodes, but memory is like there is no two categories of memories on chain, one that's more expensive, one that's less expensive, or anything like that. And so all the data is equally accessible and equally expensive. And I don't have an idea for how you'd go about having a hot storage and a cold storage one on blockchain, but I find it kind of weird because obviously if the blockchain is still live in 100 years, most of the data that's going to have been written is going to be unused it's most likely just because of entropy, So you kind of want to archive it if you want to preserve it, and it's the same problem with Evans. But you do have this problem that for day-to-day usage, it's not very, very relevant.
Food for thought. Guys, thank you a lot. One last question to finish. What's your advice for newcomers in the space?
As a non-tech person, I would say that it can be very intimidating. Like I'm well versed in crypto, but I'm not a dev. So like the conversation can feel like very, very complicated very quickly because we get into like very, very deep questions, very technical questions. But I feel that even though you're not a technical person, I still think that these are profile that we would need on StarkNet. So like, don't hesitate to ask questions. Don't hesitate to just reach out to everyone. It's still a small community. It's a very tight-knit community. So like no one will ever judge you for not understanding anything. So just like go for it and ask questions.
Yeah, I don't think I have much StarkNet specific advice except don't be afraid of Cairo, maybe. Yeah, at the end of the day, what Sylve said is
fine. Well, so let's do that. If you want to know the rest of this answer, join the Discord, join the community, and ask Sylve Lancelot directly.
And if you're building, like, try and actually build something native. Don't just copy paste Solidity code. Just don't just warp it. Think about what you can use, what you can leverage that is endemic and interesting. There are going to be a lot of AMMs on StarkNet. Think about how you can make them better. Think about how you can use account abstraction, how you can use Fossil, how you can use different tools that are available only on StarkNet to make something interesting and innovative.
Wonderful. Well, guys, thanks a lot for your time, and I'll see you around.
Thanks, Henri. Cheers.
Thanks, Henri.